I'd like to follow with what Sister Mary Prudence has done in the first session, overviewing the Church's documents on electronic media by focusing specifically on the Internet. I'd like to consider what are the historical stepping stones that have contributed to a technology that reveals man and his aspirations toward development, while at the same time exposes his failures and his faults. In this session, I will outline the history of the Internet and some of the communication modalities that are available in cyberspace. How do you think Internet even came to be thought of as something to consider? Well, in 1964, the Pentagon requested some kind of communications network to be developed so that we could protect ourselves from a first nuclear attack. A criteria was that these had to be small bits of information that had to be separated so that if anybody who is not supposed to get this information and did, wouldn't get the whole communication. So it was intended to be a communication network that had little bursts of information that could be put together by the intended recipient. So as they were developing this, the Pentagon made it more available and asked individuals at MIT to maybe then develop how is it that we can identify a sender of a message. So about 6 years later, in 1972, the first email program was written. And it's at that time that the individual who sent a message put the @ sign at the end of how he was going to identify himself. And since that time, we still have every email address, whatever it is, whoever it is, at. So that was in 1972. In 1991, the software called the World Wide Web is developed. The Internet is not the same thing as the World Wide Web. The Internet is to the World Wide Web as Europe is to France. So you can think of the Internet as a bus, and you can think of the World Wide Web as an item contained within the bus. So actually the Internet is a massive public broadcasting system, and the World Wide Web is a language system within the Internet broadcasting program. And it allows hyperlinks to other public pages, and today there are over 30 billion public pages on the web. So the Internet contains the World Wide Web, the email program, instant messaging, and some of the social networking or also the news discussion networking groups. That was only 1991. So we're talking a very recent time that this new media has evolved. It was in 1994 that the first search engine was developed. There was a desire to somehow categorize, like catalog, like we would in a library, all these broadcasting systems so that they could be looked for and then brought into the computer screen for access. So the first cataloging engine that was developed was Yahoo. And it was designed by a Stanford University graduate. Do you know what Yahoo stands for? Yahoo stands for Yet Another Hierarchical Officious oracle. And it has stayed with us even today. So it allowed us to feature a hierarchical directory to access other sites. In 1998, Google was created, again by another Stanford University graduate and his assistant. And this was a bit by mistake. They just wanted to see what they could do to create some kind of search engine that had the ability to backlink to a website. And so when they were looking for a name for their backlink system, they stumbled upon the word Google, and it was spelled Googol. But when they were typing this in, they misspelled it, and they left the misspelling. So it's now Google. But the word Google means something that has a number 1 followed by 100 zeros. And there's nothing in the universe that we can count, dust particles, atoms, that totals 1 followed by 100 zeros. So they like the name. They said this kind of picks up what it is that they want to represent with their search engine, which organizes a limitless number of information packages that can be made available. In 2002, a social networking site was developed that was called Friendster. And the founder of this particular social networking site is Jonathan Abrams. And he admitted that his main motivation to create this site was to meet attractive women. Now, the difference with this particular social networking site is that it wasn't just persons that you don't know that could visit this site, but he developed specifically for individuals that you would know. And that's why he called it Friendster. And he was the one that really developed what became very popular only a few years later of having friends that you could access or let into your site. 2 years later, 2003, MySpace was created. And it lets users build a personalized homepage. You can post information, post pictures, post videos, and now it has millions, hundreds of millions of users, and it's a very popular one, used more so by younger persons, and yet the age group that is using these sites now is climbing in the decades of age. In 2004, Facebook was launched, and it was based on, the college little photo albums that you get when you first go to a university, for example, that helps other students identify one another as well as identify the faculty. So that's how it's gotten its name. And now the most frequent users of Facebook are individuals that are in their 30s and 40s, no longer college students. In 2006, Twitter became available. And it was founded by a man whose name is Jack Dorsey. And he wanted to somehow capture the sensation of a cell phone buzzing in somebody's pocket. So initially, he wanted to call this Twitch. But he said, no, that just doesn't give the visual image that I really want for my little program. So instead, he looked up in the dictionary Twitter. And what do you think Twitter means? Yes, the chirp of a bird. But he liked another definition that was farther in the dictionary itself, and that is a short burst of inconsequential information. So individuals who send messages, they are called tweets. And tweets can only be 140 characters, And an individual who subscribes to this are called followers. And you can restrict your tweets to just individuals you want to receive a tweet, or if you don't designate it, then anybody who is on Twitter can get this information. And when we were having the forest fires in California, for example, this program was very helpful to the fire departments because persons were typing in 140 character bits of information of where the fire was, who might need a rescue, where they think it was going to spread to, what the wind conditions were. So it has been very helpful. What they've discovered, though, is individuals who use Twitter are more likely individuals who are typing bits of information about what they observe that may not always necessarily be helpful. So the top followed Twitter users follow persons like Britney Spears or Oprah Winfrey, for example, and also the CNN Breaking News. They do a lot of Twittering to get their news data. And the Harvard University was intrigued by this process in 2006 that just took off. So they studied 300,000 Twitter users, and they found that 10% of the users created 90% of the content. So they are sending a lot of tweets. And that these persons who are using Twitter themselves didn't post information about themselves, but were posting information about others. So there's kind of a curious little twist to this particular computer mechanism that was available. There was a recent study, a recent report in the newspaper dated December 17th in 2009 in the United States, where a mother was tweeting on the computer and firemen came to her home because they had received a phone call from one of her sons that their little brother had drowned in the pool. So the firemen and policemen went to the mother, who was still at the computer, and said, "Ma'am, your son has drowned and we have someone trying to resuscitate him." She went to the poolside to verify the accuracy of what had transpired, and guess what she did next? She went back to the computer to tweet what was just happening. So there's a way in which individuals have sometimes become obsessed by some of these things in ways that are unusual. And in my third session, I'll begin to talk about some of the psychological behaviors that we're noticing with electronic media that we weren't accustomed to most often seeing with face-to-face interactions. So in closing my first presentation, I'd like to read a quote by Pope John Paul II in his World Day Communications message of 2002. "In these troubled times, let me ask, how can we assure that this wondrous instrument, first conceived in the context of military operations, can now serve the cause of peace? Can it favor that culture of dialogue, participation, solidarity, and reconciliation without which peace cannot flourish? The Church believes it can, and to ensure that this is what will happen, she is determined to enter this new forum armed with the gospel of Christ, the Prince of Peace." Let us continue our determination to use the internet to proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ to the world. Thank you. We'll take this next session to consider some questions and discussion.